First of all, if you are interested in stories that the mainstream media doesn't show, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, that way you won't miss any episodes like this. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré took over as leader of Burkina Faso in September 2022 at the age of 34, few international observers were betting on lasting structural change. The country was facing a devastating security crisis, with jihadist groups controlling vast swathes of the country and an economy dependent on gold and cotton exports to European markets. However, internal government documents obtained by this investigation reveal that Traoré had developed a comprehensive economic plan in the first months of his administration. The National Economic Independence Program, PIEN, developed in partnership with Burkinabe economists trained at African universities, proposed a gradual break with the colonial economic model still in force in the country. When we look at Captain Traoré's early speeches, we see that he was not speaking just as a military man, but as someone who deeply understood the mechanisms of economic dependence, says Dr. Amadou Sanogo, an economist at the University of Ouagadougou and an informal government advisor. He recognized that our military vulnerability was directly linked to our economic fragility. The first sign of change came in October 2022, when Traoré announced the creation of the National Agency for Strategic Development, ANDES, an agency responsible for coordinating investments in critical infrastructure. Unlike previous initiatives, ANDES would operate with exclusively national and regional resources, avoiding conditional loans from Western financial institutions. Marie Cabaret, a trader in Ouagadougou's central market, recalls initial skepticism. When he talked about changing our economy, we thought it was just another political promise. We had heard it before. But when work began on the road to Bobo Dioulasso, we realized it was different. The implementation of the PIEN began with a deliberate focus on transport and energy infrastructure. Between November 2022 and March 2023, the Traoré government launched 5 simultaneous projects that would fundamentally change national logistics. The most ambitious project was the construction of the Burkina-Mali Pan-African Highway, a 280-kilometer route that would directly connect the agricultural production centers of the west of the country to the ports of Abidjan, in Ivory Coast, without relying exclusively on routes controlled by French companies. According to technical reports from Andes, the project was financed through an innovative partnership. 40% of the resources came from mining royalties renegotiated with foreign companies, 35% from a sovereign fund created with gold reserves from the central bank, and 25% from direct investments from partner countries such as Ghana and Mali. The genius of the strategy was to use our own mineral resources as collateral, but without mortgaging the country's future, explains Fatimata Ouedraogo, former director of planning at the Ministry of Economy. For the first time, we had a government that understood that infrastructure is sovereignty. The impact was immediate. Data from the National Institute of Statistics shows that the cost of transporting goods between Ouagadougou and the producing regions fell by 23% between April and August 2023. For producers like Bukari Sawadogo, from the Kédougou Agricultural Cooperative, this meant direct access to regional markets. Before, we sold our produce to French middlemen who paid low prices, says Sawadogo. With the new road and the trade agreements the government has made, we now export directly to Ghana and Nigeria. Our profits have doubled. At the same time, Traoré launched the National Solar Energy Program, PNS, taking advantage of the country's potential of 5.5 hours of daily sunlight. By September 2023, 12 small and medium-sized solar plants had been built, increasing the country's energy capacity by 35%. The most controversial change came in April 2023, when Traoré announced a unilateral review of mining contracts signed under previous governments. The measure mainly affected French and Canadian companies that operated gold mines under concessions with royalties considered inadequate. Leaked diplomatic documents reveal that the Élysée Palace considered the move an unacceptable provocation and pressed the African Union to diplomatically isolate Burkina Faso. However, Traoré had anticipated this backlash and built a robust regional support network. The captain understood that we could not make this transition alone, said a source close to the government, who spoke on condition of anonymity. That is why the first contacts were with leaders such as Thomas Sankara, Mali, Niger, and Ghana. The idea was to create an economic bloc that would protect our sovereign decisions. In June 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formalized the Alliance of Sahel States, ES, an agreement that included clauses on economic cooperation and mutual defense. The alliance allowed the three countries to negotiate as a bloc with alternative partners, reducing dependence on former colonizers. The results have been impressive. Data from the Ministry of Commerce shows that exports to EA countries increased by 187% between June and December 2023. At the same time, partnerships with China, Turkey, and Russia have resulted in direct investments of $2.3 billion in strategic sectors. Philippe Ouedraogo, an analyst at the Center for Strategic Studies in Ouagadougou, notes, Traoré has achieved something that no other Burkinabe leader has done before, completely diversifying our external dependence. We have not only swapped France for China, but we have created multiple partnerships that give us room to maneuver. The Western reaction was swift. In August 2023, the European Union suspended some cooperation programs, and the IMF froze negotiations on new loans. However, Traoré had prepared for this scenario, accumulating enough reserves to operate independently for at least 18 months. The impact of Ibrahim Traoré's economic reforms has transcended macroeconomic indicators, generating perceptible and measurable changes in the daily lives of Burkinabe. Between September 2023 and March 2024, the government implemented a series of strategically funded social programs with additional revenues from the renegotiation of mining contracts and the optimization of tax collections. The most emblematic example of this transformation was the National School Feeding Program, PNAE, officially launched in October 2023. Unlike previous initiatives dependent on international donations, the PNAE operates with an exclusively national budget of 47 billion CFA francs per year, serving 1.2 million children in 3,847 primary and secondary schools. The fundamental difference is that we no longer depend on international organizations that can withhold aid according to their political interests, explains Rasmain Ouedraogo, the program's national coordinator. Every meal served strengthens our food sovereignty and our local economy. The statistics are impressive. The program purchases 85% of its inputs directly from Burkinabe producers, creating a captive market worth 2.8 billion CFA francs per year for family farming. Cooperatives such as Banfora, which specializes in rice cultivation, have seen their production increase by 340% to meet school demand. Fatimata Traoré, a farmer and mother of 4 in Kédougou, sums up the impact. Before, our children would come home from school hungry and we would struggle to feed them properly. Now, they receive 2 meals at school and also bring home knowledge about nutrition. It's a complete transformation. The public health sector, historically neglected and dependent on international non-governmental organizations, has undergone an unprecedented revitalization. The Traoré government created the National Public Health Fund, FNSP, in December 2023, capitalizing it with 15% of renegotiated mining revenues. Between January and June 2024, the FNSP financed the construction of 23 community health centers in previously underserved regions, equipping them with basic medical technology and solar generators. The program also included the accelerated training of 450 community health technicians, trained in methodologies adapted to the local context. Dr. Bukari Sawadogo, director of the Yalgado Ouedraogo University Hospital, highlights a paradigm shift. For the first time in decades, we have budget predictability. I can plan medium-term treatments, purchase equipment, and maintain stocks of essential medicines without relying on erratic donations. The health results were quickly visible. Data from the National Institute of Public Health indicate that infant mortality fell by 22% in the regions covered by the new health centers. At the same time, vaccination coverage increased from 68% to 89% over the same period, bringing Burkina Faso closer to the standards recommended by the World Health Organization. The educational revolution implemented by Traoré goes beyond school meals. The National Education Modernization Program, PNMI, launched in February 2024, represents the largest investment in education in the country's history, 89 billion CFA francs over 3 years. The program introduced 3 key innovations: technical education focused on priority economic sectors, universal digital education, and the development of national teachers. By July 2024, 67 technical schools had been established, offering training in solar energy, modern agriculture, automotive mechanics, and information technology. We are preparing a generation that will not need to emigrate to find opportunities, says Aminata Cabaret, National Director of the PNME. Each technical course was designed to meet the specific demands of our changing economy. The digital education component deserves special mention. Using connectivity provided by the national satellite, the program equipped 1,200 schools with educational tablets manufactured in partnership with a Ghanaian company. The devices contain educational content in French and more, the main local language, enabling bilingual learning from primary school onwards. Salimata Awadrogo, a teacher at a rural school near Kaya, witnesses the impact daily. My students now have access to the same information as children in Ouagadougou. Some have even started small online businesses selling local crafts. It's a transformation I never imagined I would see in my career. The most symbolic and technologically ambitious transformation has occurred in the telecommunications sector. In January 2024, Burkina Faso became the third West African country to launch its own communications satellite, BurkinaSat-1, developed in partnership with Ghanaian engineers and Turkish experts. The project, budgeted at 23 billion CFA francs and financed entirely from the country's sovereign wealth fund, has revolutionized connectivity dynamics in the country. Before BurkinaSat-1, Burkina Faso depended on French infrastructure for international communications, paying rates 300% higher than the regional average. Digital sovereignty is as important as food sovereignty, Traoré said during the launch ceremony. A country that does not control its communications does not control its destiny. The results were immediate and transformative. Broadband internet costs fell by 45% in 6 months, while average connection speeds increased by 280%. Previously isolated regions, such as the northern Sahel and parts of the center-north, received high-quality connectivity for the first time. The economic impact of the digital revolution has exceeded initial expectations. Data from the Ministry of Digital Economy shows that 2,340 small digital businesses were created between February and August 2024, generating approximately 8,700 direct jobs. Sectors such as rural e-commerce, online education, and telemedicine have experienced exponential growth. Musa Sankara, a 26-year-old entrepreneur in Bobo Dioulasso, exemplifies this transformation. I created a platform that connects rural producers directly with urban consumers. In 8 months, we have already brokered sales worth 340 million CFA francs. Before the national satellite, this would have been impossible. Despite impressive social and economic advances, significant challenges continue to limit the full potential for national transformation. The security situation, although stabilized in the central and western regions of the country, still represents the greatest obstacle to homogeneous national development. Military intelligence reports indicate that jihadist-oriented armed groups maintain control or influence over approximately 35% of the national territory, concentrated mainly in the provinces of Somme, Udalin, Sino, and parts of Yaga. These areas, rich in mineral resources and agricultural potential, remain inaccessible to civilian development projects. The equation is complex, explains General Celestin Simpor, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces. We need to pacify territories to implement development, but we also need to offer economic alternatives to dismantle the recruitment of young people by armed groups. Traoré's strategy for this dilemma is outlined in the as-yet unannounced Sahel Plan 2025, a strategic document obtained exclusively by this investigation. The plan calls for the creation of special economic zones in newly pacified areas, offering exceptional tax incentives to national and regional companies that set up shop in previously unstable regions. The pilot model will be implemented in Djibo, the capital of Somme province, where military operations succeeded in re-establishing government control in May 2024. The government plans to invest 12 billion CFA francs in basic infrastructure, roads, energy, communications, followed by incentives for agricultural and processing companies. Burkina Faso's internal transformation was accompanied by a complete reorientation of its economic diplomacy. Traoré systematically built a network of diversified partnerships that reduced the country's historical dependence on former European colonizers. The Alliance of Sahel States, EES, formalized in June 2023 with Mali and Niger, has evolved from a military agreement into a robust economic platform. The three countries have established a functional customs union, a joint development bank, and a common currency for interregional transactions, the Sahel, backed by the gold reserves of the member countries. The EES is not just about security, explains Dr. Moussa Ouedraogo, Special Advisor for Regional Integration. It is about creating a regional economy that is resilient to external shocks and able to negotiate from a position of strength with international partners. The figures support this claim. Between June 2023 and September 2024, intra-EES trade increased by 312%, reaching 127 billion CFA francs. Burkina Faso products such as cotton, cereals, and refined gold found captive markets in partner countries, while Burkina Faso became a privileged importer of Nigerian oil and Malian phosphates. At the same time, Traoré has diversified global partnerships with strategic pragmatism. China has become the largest single trading partner, accounting for 23% of Burkina Faso exports by 2024. Turkey has emerged as a preferred supplier of technology and industrial equipment. Russia provides energy security through uranium exploration agreements and civil nuclear cooperation. We do not exchange one dependency for another, emphasizes Kader Ouedraogo, Minister of Foreign Affairs. We have multiple partnerships that allow us to always choose the best option for our national interests. An often underestimated dimension of the economic revolution was its impact on Burkinabe national self-esteem and cultural identity. Decades of external dependence had created a mentality of inferiority that limited collective aspirations. The success of economic reforms has generated a phenomenon that local sociologists have called renewed Burkinabe pride. Cultural expressions, local languages, and ancestral traditions have experienced a remarkable revitalization, often incorporated into narratives of national development. Our young people no longer talk about leaving for France, notes Aisha Ouedraogo, a sociologist at the University of Ouagadougou. They plan careers here, they set up businesses here, they dream of futures here. This psychological change is perhaps the most important of all. The government capitalized on this identity transformation by creating Burkinabe Heritage Month in July 2024, celebrating economic achievements alongside cultural traditions. Local festivals received government funding, artisans gained access to digital markets, and national languages were incorporated into technical education programs. Bukari Cabaret, a traditional mask maker in Ouagadougou, testifies to this synthesis. Now I sell my products to tourists from all over the world via the internet. I use ancestral techniques, but with modern technology. It's as if our past and future have finally met. Economic analysts differ significantly on the long-term sustainability of Traoré's model. Critics argue that continued reliance on mining revenues maintains historical structural vulnerabilities, merely transferring external risks without eliminating them entirely. Burkina Faso remains a primary export economy, argues Dr. Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo, an economist and critic of government policies. If international gold prices collapse, this whole model could quickly collapse. Government advocates, however, argue that diversifying trade partnerships and developing domestic production capacities have created structural resilience that did not previously exist. The argument is reinforced by data from the central bank that shows international reserves at historic levels and a positive trade balance for 18 consecutive months. For the first time in our history, we have multiple options for every economic sector, said Dr. Salimata Ouedraogo, a government economic advisor. If a partner pressures us, we have credible alternatives. That is real economic sovereignty. The ultimate test of sustainability will come during the democratic transition scheduled for 2025. Traoré has publicly confirmed that he will not run for president, keeping his commitment to the electoral timetable set by the military junta itself. The key question is whether the economic institutions created will survive political change. Internal documents obtained reveal that Traoré is implementing a deliberate strategy to institutionalize economic reforms ahead of the democratic transition. The goal is to create legal and administrative structures that will be difficult for future civilian governments to reverse. Between September and December 2024, the government will enact a series of organic laws that constitutionalize fundamental principles: sovereignty over natural resources, priority for African partners in public contracts, and maintenance of minimum strategic reserves. These laws will require qualified majorities in parliament to be modified. We do not want to tie the hands of future governments, but to ensure that fundamental achievements are preserved, said a source close to the government who spoke on condition of anonymity. Burkinabe democracy will be stronger if it is built on solid economic foundations. Internal government polls obtained exclusively show 73% approval of Traoré's economic policies, the highest rating for any Burkinabe leader since independence in 1960. More significantly, 68% of those surveyed say they do not want fundamental changes in the country's economic direction. The success of Traoré's reforms has not gone unnoticed in other African countries facing similar challenges. Government delegations from Senegal, Ghana, Tanzania, and the Democratic Republic of Congo have visited Ouagadougou to study specific policies, particularly on renegotiating mining contracts and diversifying international partnerships. Burkina Faso is becoming a laboratory for a new model of African development, said Dr. Kwame Asante, an expert on African economics at the University of Ghana. If these reforms survive the democratic transition, we could have a replicable blueprint for the entire continent. Burkina Faso's regional influence has grown exponentially. The country will host the African Economic Sovereignty Conference in March 2025, bringing together continental leaders to discuss alternatives to the post-colonial economic model. Organizations such as the African Union and the African Development Bank have expressed interest in studying Burkinabe policies for continental programs. Beyond statistics and analysis, Burkina Faso's transformation is best understood through the personal stories of citizens experiencing everyday change. These individual narratives illustrate how macroeconomic policies translate into concrete hope and opportunities. Marie Cabaret, a 47-year-old shopkeeper in Ouagadougou's central market, embodies this transformation. In 2022, my 3 eldest children were planning to migrate to Libya to look for work in Europe. Today, one is studying solar energy at the Koudougou Technical School, another has opened a cell phone repair shop in the neighborhood, and the youngest wants to be a telecommunications engineer. None of them are talking about leaving anymore. Ibrahim Traoré, a 34-year-old farmer in the Kaya region, is experiencing changes that have completely transformed his economic outlook. Before, I would plant corn and wait for rain. If it didn't rain, we would go hungry. Now, I have a solar irrigation system, access to improved seeds, and a guaranteed contract with the school feeding program. For the first time, I can plan for my family's future. The changes are particularly striking among young people. Fatimata Traoré, a 19-year-old IT student in Bobo Dioulasso, represents a generation with radically different aspirations. My parents always told me that to be successful, I would have to study in France. Now, I see endless opportunities here. I want to create a mobile app company that solves Burkinabe problems. Why leave when I can build the future of my own country? Despite the unquestionable successes, critical observers identify structural challenges that still need to be addressed to ensure long-term sustainability of the transformations that have been initiated. The issue of economic diversification remains partially unresolved. Although the country has reduced its dependence on single partners, the economy is still predominantly based on exports of primary commodities. Sectors such as light manufacturing, processing of agricultural products, and financial services remain underdeveloped. We need a second phase of reforms focused on industrialization, argues Dr. Aminata Traoré, an independent economist. Exporting raw gold instead of processed jewelry means we leave value added in other countries. The issue of regional equity also demands attention. While central and western regions have experienced rapid growth, areas affected by insecurity remain economically marginalized. This disparity can generate social tensions if not systematically addressed. Furthermore, continued dependence on non-renewable natural resources maintains vulnerabilities to external shocks. Fluctuations in international gold prices, the main source of government revenue, could jeopardize funding for social programs that have become central to the government's legitimacy. The ultimate test of Traoré's legacy will come in presidential and parliamentary elections scheduled for July 2025. For the first time in Burkina Faso's history, a military leader who implemented deep structural reforms will voluntarily hand over power to a democratically chosen successor. 3 scenarios are considered plausible by political analysts. In the first, pro-continuity candidates win with platforms of deepening the reforms that have been initiated. In the second, traditional political forces return to power promising normalization of international relations. In the third, hybrid leaderships emerge that maintain economic gains while modifying controversial aspects of foreign policy. The true measure of Traoré's success will be whether the transformations survive democracy, said Dr. Boukari Ouedraogo, a political scientist at the University of Ouagadougou. A genuine economic revolution is one that becomes irreversible regardless of who governs. Recent surveys suggest that the Burkinabe population clearly distinguishes between support for economic policies and preferences for the political system. While 73% approve of economic reforms, 67% express a desire for a return to civil democracy. This apparent contradiction could define the character of the upcoming elections. In the markets of Ouagadougou, the rural schools of Kaya, the workshops of Bobo Dioulasso and the agricultural cooperatives of Kédougou, a quiet but profound transformation is underway. Ibrahim Traoré has succeeded in irreversibly altering expectations about what is possible for a small African country determined to control its own economic destiny. The changes transcend macroeconomic indicators or geopolitical realignments. They touch on fundamental aspects of the Burkinabe experience: the ability to dream of local futures, the dignity of working with one's own resources, the hope that the nation's youth can prosper without emigrating. When I see children at my school talking about careers in solar energy or information technology, I understand that something fundamental has changed in our collective mindset, says Aminata Cabaret, a rural primary school principal. They no longer think in terms of limits, but in terms of possibilities. Whether these transformations will survive the inevitable political turbulences of the future remains in open question. However, one thing seems certain: Ibrahim Traoré has demonstrated that African countries can break away from structures of dependency inherited from the colonial period without plunging into economic chaos or international isolation. The next chapter of Burkinabe history will be written by Burkinabe themselves, in free elections, with real choices between alternative development models. Regardless of the outcome, the 2022 to 2025 period will stand as evidence that accelerated economic transformation is possible when political leadership, natural resources, and popular will converge in a common direction. For international observers, Burkina Faso offers valuable lessons on the possibilities and limits of economic revolution in the contemporary African context. For ordinary Burkinabes, it offers something even more precious: the certainty that their country can be a protagonist, not just a spectator, of its own economic history. If this analysis has made you think differently about power, sovereignty, and leadership in the 21st century, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Traoré's story is just beginning, and you need to follow every move of this silent revolution that is changing the world. See you in the next episode.